It'd be fun just to catch up. Yeah, hear how things are going at Clay, hear how you
Yeah.
structure the team. I feel like you sort of created an entirely new function, and it's one that early stage startups are definitely looking to learn from.
Yeah, you bet. So the kind of like key ideas behind GTM engineering are to one, like centralize a lot of the tasks that have previously been owned by individual sellers. And I say own, but in many cases it's owned but not acted upon. So things like sourcing contacts and writing creative messaging and correctly prioritizing accounts and doing deep research and all these things. And I think if you talk to many sellers, they would actually tell you that they would prefer not to do some of these things. That actually this is not the part of their job that brings them joy or actually is like high leverage for them. The part of their job that's the best is to be talking with customers like all day. Um, and so the central idea of GTM engineering is kind of around centralization and allowing a small tiger team of one or maybe a few people to operate these high leverage AI tools, Clay being, I would say, the leader in the space, to do the work that dozens or hundreds of people used to do, kind of across functions. And when we raised our Series C, we kind of did an interview with the New York Times where we described GTM engineering as like one of the first AI native jobs. It's a
Yeah.
job that actually would not exist without the AI tools today because you cannot generate creative, amazing messaging at scale without AI. You cannot like clean and research companies at scale without AI. You
Yeah.
cannot actually like stitch together the logic of what you need to really decide if a prospect is qualified or whatever without these like pretty powerful models. Um, and so GTM engineers leverage all of that. And then when you have this sort of centralization, that actually brings a couple of benefits. One is you can actually experiment much faster.
Yeah.
And so, especially for early stage, experimentation is the default. But what we see is that even at the later stages, when companies start to lose that muscle, especially within GTM, their pipeline starts to atrophy and everything kind of starts to slip, and they actually have to resort to, higher ad spending or hiring more SDRs or hiring, just kind of like more brute force techniques versus staying nimble and being able to experiment. And so because you have the centralized control over what personas, what accounts, what messaging, it actually allows you to then run experiments against those people and actually find what we describe as GTM alpha. So this
Cool.
is like an edge in the market that's unique to your company. And Clay customers are like famous for this. So like Intercom, for example, they learned a couple of secrets about how to take Fin to market through experimenting on using Clay in many ways on what kind of accounts and people were the right fits for Finn. And it's actually an interesting story of where an incumbent sort of took the lead in the market, versus other, AI customer support tools where that's a space where you would have thought Intercom would have been like the legacy software. Um, and so that's true for the big players. It's definitely true for the smaller players, and the startups, which need to kind of iterate and experiment in order to kind of find an edge. Then the final piece is once you find an edge, you actually have to keep finding new edges. And so the other kind of core idea behind this is that all go-to-market tactics expire and that go-to-market tactics today as a sort of double-edged sword on AI expire faster than they used to.
Yep.
So everybody learns about them, everybody starts doing them. The tooling has kind of made it so that doing the basic stuff is pretty easy, actually. Doing things like job changers is pretty easy. And so not only do you need to be finding an edge and experimenting, but then once you find that edge, you can't stop. You have to keep finding an edge. And so the real edge in go-to-market, the real go-to-market alpha is the ability to kind of continuously be finding new things that work. And the only way to do that is to kind of keep iterating and keep experimenting. The only way you can do that is with a centralized team with these high leverage AI tools that is kind of automating the frontline sales and marketing work. And so these are kind of the core ideas behind go-to-market engineering and a lot of the stuff that Clay is working on.
Yeah, that's great. And when you think about sort of go-to-market engineering for early stage companies, are you primarily starting with getting all the systems and processes in a good place? So data hygiene is sort of the first priority, and sort of how do you think about sales and moving into upsell and cross-sell as well? Because it sort of feels like this can sit across both sales and customer success, and there's multiple different functions at play here. And so I'd love to understand how you think about KPIs for each.
Yeah, certainly. Actually, go-to-market engineering it covers all of go-to-market. So post sales, growth, expansion, retention, those are all go-to-market, and go-to-market engineering covers all of those. The key task for the first go-to-market engineer or the first team that's doing things like go-to-market engineering at a startup is to build the golden list, in my opinion. And even if you talk to mature companies, they often don't have this. This is a list of the top accounts that are currently kind of like in your market. And so it's like an updated list of, for Clay, this would be like growth stage B2B companies that are investing in AI go-to-market. And so the interesting thing about this list is Cursor, when we first met them, they were not kind of in our ICP criteria. 2 months later, they were, and they were like large enough, certainly by revenue and by complexity and volume, to now be one of Clay's kind of like marquee customers. And so this golden list, it's a list that's kind of generated once, but then it's actually updated with new accounts and contacts, and and it's scored and graded. And so if you say pull like 6,000 accounts, you can segment that into tier one, tier two, tier three accounts. On those accounts, you have contacts graded probably like A through F, where you say, for example, VP of RevOps is grade A contact, and AE is probably like a grade D or F contact. No offense to AEs, but they don't typically buy Clay. Um, and the reason this is so valuable is because the way that most early stage companies operate with their go-to-market, which is exactly how I used to run it at my previous company when I was a Clay customer, is you kind of do these like ad hoc tasks. And so your founder might be in SF in 2 weeks, and they might ask you, all right, what are the top 20 executives that I should invite to a dinner that I'm hosting with like our primary VC? Assembling a good list like that for a lot of companies is actually a lot of work. It takes
Yeah.
hours. You have to ask people. They go to the AEs. They say, who do you want? Whatever. If you build your golden list correctly, you can just run a query that says, top open opportunities in San Francisco, grade A or B contacts at this seniority level. Boom, you have your list. It's already in place, so you already have the contacts. You can email them on behalf of the founder. You can message them on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And and so that ability to kind of do a somewhat last minute dinner invite, that's actually a litmus test for how good that golden list is. And I think the very first task that a GTM engineer should do for their companies is build that list. Usually it's massively clarifying for the organization as well, for the founder and the founding AE and the founding product folks to kind of say, here are the accounts that are like the best targets for us and why. And
Yeah.
then, last thing I'd say here on the iteration point is, once you got the muscle to do that, let's say you pivot. Let's say you launch a new product that works much better than your current one. Let's say any number of things that impact early stage companies happens. Then you have the muscle to kind of pivot that list rapidly into the new thing. And so as a company, having that golden list actually reduces your iteration time as well.
Yeah, that's great. It's also super interesting, I find, with a lot of the modern go-to-market AI tooling. For a lot of them, it feels like they're going into conversations a little bit more naively. I think there's this assumption that sales reps want to choose their own tools, they want to build their own tech stack. I find maybe the last generation of building and scaling SaaS companies, we put too much pressure on sales reps to become buyers of tools. And it sounds like you're really starting to think through like how do you remove some of those buying decisions as a barrier? And you're kind of empowering the go-to-market engineers to make some of these decisions on behalf of sales.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, informed by sales, but a lot of companies I talk to, actually all the great insights from sales, they're either known and not acted upon, or they're actually like not captured, and a lot of times it's for like bandwidth reasons. And so the my least favorite conversation is chatting with, what I'd like to do with Clay is I'd like to try to talk to the top rep at a company and then also talk to their ops team. And my least favorite experience, and one that I try to help companies work on, is when the ops team says, hey, well, we're working on this new data point that we think, this new list that we think is going to be really effective. And the top rep says, well, I told them about this 6 months ago.
Yeah.
So actually, like, the pitch around this is with a much better tooling and centralization. It actually allows these ideas that exist out in the field to kind of be acted upon faster. And so, for example, I'll give you a great example of Clay. So we ended up closing DoorDash, Airbnb, and Uber. And at first glance, when we did our targeting, these companies were actually not on our list because they're kind of not B2B companies. What
Yeah.
we realized though is that they're all kind of consumer companies, but they have these two-sided marketplaces where it's very important for them to be able to source businesses and source demand. And the
Yeah.
teams that were doing that, even though they weren't doing it for like sales per se, they were doing the same job that like a demand gen or a RevOps team would be doing to support a sales team. And so
Yeah.
we were able to build a list of like 250 marketplace companies, almost like the next day and actually start targeting those folks in kind of an organized fashion. Doing that in a different organization or someone without a GTM engineering team might not happen for another quarter or two, in which case, the insight might be gone. You might have actually, there might have actually been a special purpose marketplace data sourcing tool that's come to market. The data problems might have been fixed by AI. Like there's all sorts of reasons that the timeliness of these insights is so important, but in a lot of cases, they might not get acted on.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you bring that up because I do think oftentimes when we think sales, we think more traditional B2B companies. But every company essentially has some sort of sales team. It might be an advertising sales team, it
Hmm.
might be supply side growth, it might be demand side growth. There's so many different ways to think about business models. And I do find that any venture scale business at some point has some iteration of a sales team.
Yeah.
And so I think this is very much broadly applicable to consumer and marketplace companies as
I
well.
mean, take someone like Duolingo, one of the like incredible consumer success stories of the last few years. They have a B2B business. They sell learning and development solutions to enterprises with global operations, right? And so, who's a good customer for them? Well, probably not a Fortune 500 initially that has like all this stuff probably already, but maybe a company that's just expanding.
Yeah,
A company that has announced that they're hiring in London but hasn't actually filled many roles yet, which is actually where Clay is, or I guess London's English speaking, but pick another geo, right? And so yeah, you're absolutely right. The like need for high quality data that's sourced quickly and integrated quickly and acted on quickly is kind of ever present among businesses. And whether or not you use Clay, whether or not you call it GTM engineering, if you don't kind of have this function,
mm.
even at the early stages, it makes it a lot harder to just kind of operate the whole business.
Yeah, for sure. Thinking just sort of internally at Clay specifically, how do you think about each of these SWAT teams? How many projects are they tackling per quarter? Like, what are some of the internal operations and challenges that you face as a new organization?
Yeah, so we treat it like a product. So we have a bi-weekly release notes that come out from our ops team talking about all the things they're doing. Usually it's segmented into different sections. So, even at Clay, we have data quality things that come up, and so we're working on those. We have new campaigns that we're launching. We have new automations that we're launching for reps, new signals that we're experimenting with, new tooling that we're integrating. And so the iteration cycles on those, it's about every 2 weeks for us. And there's a linear board where you can actually follow along with this work. And
Cool.
then just very tactically, we have a Slack channel where you could submit a Slack ticket that then gets funneled into linear and queued up and triaged by the ops team. And so at a high level, it looks a lot like a situation where you have an early stage product and you've got your engineers kind of directly connected to like a ticket queue, and you're getting feedback from users all the time, and you're triaging it and submitting it. Then the other piece that people miss is to get the analytics. This is
Yeah.
this is actually a key thing. There's a lot of rep tooling out there that doesn't get used, and nobody knows it doesn't get used. They have very anecdotal evidence that it doesn't get used, but they
Yeah.
don't actually know why. They don't know what parts of it. So you need to have a way to actually track what is the kind of like field engagement on these things. And so, for example, we use a Slack app actually, which allows you to see people marking tasks as done or triggering things. You can also do this in a lot of different tools. But so to summarize the four things, our internal ops team, ticket queue to submit requests and ideas from leadership, from reps, from anyone, linear board to track all that stuff and prioritize it, bi-weekly sprints and release cycles with release notes attached, and then analytics on the back end that's actually tracking the internal tooling and seeing if people are using the things that they've requested. Um, and once you it's harder than it sounds like to set that up because I think it's a very new way of like RevOps and ops to work. But once you get it going, you can kind of like take a step back from maybe being maybe even as strategic with your go-to-market and just let the process happen. And that's kind of what we've seen at Clay. It's a fairly like organic, almost like flywheel type thing right now.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's interesting. You brought up a really great point. I'm also hearing go-to-market engineering come up as sort of a job of the future. I think a lot of folks that are trying to figure out, what are the roles currently in market that you can apply for on LinkedIn that give you firsthand visibility into all of the new AI tools that are coming to market. How do you think about sort of breaking into go-to-market engineering? What are the things that you look for when you're hiring on your team? Like, what are some of the skill sets that make someone good at this role?
Yeah, um at a fundamental level, like you need to think programmatically. You need to kind of think if this, then that. The reason, in my opinion, that 95% of AI initiatives fail or whatever, like there's various reasons these things don't work, is they don't actually have people that are kind of saying like, what does the workflow actually look like?
Yeah,
And how do the things interact? So, to give you an example, like if you send a contact to outreach from Clay, it needs to be synced with Salesforce or else it's not going to work.
yeah,
But Clay doesn't actually know when Salesforce syncs with outreach. That happens outside of Clay's purview. And so you have to set up Clay with that kind of detail in mind, or else suddenly this amazing campaign that you've built or whatever,
yeah,
it just ends up not sending or sending to the wrong people, or it's all messed up. Um, and so I do think like I've never taken the infamous symbolic systems class at Stanford or whatever, but some level of like systems thinking and like programmatic thinking is required. And but that doesn't mean you have to be a programmer. There's a lot of kind of like ex consulting, ex financial analysts, a lot of growth people and ops people that are already used to doing this. It just happens more in like Google Sheets. A lot of like really successful AEs and BDRs. Like the profile we used to hire for and still do on the junior side of Clay is kind of like a BDR with a computer science degree,
cool.
um, which believe it or not, those people exist. And so I think that is like your foundation. That'll make you good. What makes you great is actually the other side of it. So it's actually being able to say, okay, actually understand what the business needs and why it makes sense to do it this way and why it doesn't work to do it that way.
Yeah,
And whether you've been in seat as a seller, you've owned a pipeline number, or you can do these like ride-alongs with sellers to kind of see what the day looks like. That level of field level understanding, actually, in my opinion, will put you in the upper echelon of even like good RevOps teams because a lot of them, just end up a little bit disconnected from what the seller workflow actually is. And so if you can bring the technical side to the actual understanding of the business and seller workflow, that makes you great. And then what makes you amazing basically if you can kind of say, okay, I am a product owner where GTM is my product, and I like own the roadmap and implementation of what we're building. Those people are 10x employees on the go-to-market side. I think like if you get one of those for your startup or you get one of those in-house, like you should pay them as well as your best engineer because
yeah.
they will probably be responsible for, tens of millions of dollars of pipeline directly or indirectly. So that's a couple like high level things to look for. And then yeah, I'm happy to talk about like interview questions or things like that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think it's really interesting as well. I feel like in the ecosystem right now, there's sort of a misconception on sort of how much companies are able to completely change their internal processes or how much they're able to completely sort of
Yeah.
reinvent the things that they're doing. How much of the work on the go-to-market engineering side of things is more so optimizing existing workflows or sort of building upon what they currently have? And to what degree do you feel like you've been able to really encourage a customer to either evolve or reinvent entirely new workflows?
Yeah, so, shifting from talking about like early stage companies to more established companies with processes in place, typically the like average state of play is that the data quality really degrades over time. And so most companies I talk to, they're interested in Clay. It typically starts out because they have some sort of pretty difficult data problem that they're trying to address. And this can be things like, my reps are telling me that they can never call people and they pick up the phone, or it could be sort of deeper things like I'm just not feeling good about this territory carve that I did. I don't know if I gave my reps a good list of accounts, which is
Yep.
really a tough thing because you're doing an activity that probably is going to drive your pipeline numbers for the rest of the year, and you're not actually sure about the fundamental data behind it. So it's a real kind of difficult issue. Um, and so the very first thing that an established company should do is just work on their data quality. And the good news about doing that is you don't need a bunch of fancy messaging happening. You can just connect Clay to your CRM or data warehouse and just do the work of filling in fields and making sure things are correct. And I've got my favorite, like going even deeper than that place to start is just industries. Most companies have a bespoke view of their market. For example, at Clay, we take the entire tech industry and we segment it to like 12 different things. And then we have non-tech, basically.
Yep.
And so that's not the way it works on something like LinkedIn or in ZoomInfo, where it's kind of like, hey, you have these pretty set industries that don't actually map to how your specific company goes to market. So the first thing that I think a lot of companies could do is just properly segment their accounts by like industry and sub-industry. And that is a good starter data problem that will involve enriching data in Clay, using agents, thinking about your ICP, et cetera. But you don't need to like talk to sellers or interrupt seller workflows or rejigger anything. You can just work within Clay and with your CRM. And extensions of that are ways that people kind of get initial wins. Once you do that, then things really open up because you really cannot automate a lot or run these outbound or inbound campaigns without high quality data. But
Yep.
once you have it, it's much easier to kind of have confidence in it and to say, okay, let's start picking off these seller workflows. And usually you're going to want to start with your SMB or like mid-market segments if you have those and start to kind of like send messaging to sellers so that they can review it and send it. And then once that gets good enough, then you can actually automate the first touch. Then you can actually maybe automate a LinkedIn message. You can automate a phone talk track that you send over. You can kind of take it piece by piece, but um, I almost would advise that companies almost just like put that in their background if they have kind of established processes running and just focus on their data quality. And even if you never get to like, automated outbound or these agentic GTM workflows, if you just improve your data quality, everything that you're doing on top of that will improve as well.
Yeah, very much so. And it's so interesting as well because I do think in the current state of the world, there's so much competition and there's competition even at the earliest stages. And so I do think the
Yeah.
companies that are able to really invest in targeted marketing, really remove any unnecessary emails or messaging. I think we're in a really unique time where the teams that are able to really get deeper and deeper into specific industries are going to be able to build a lot more loyalty and they'll be able to see a much higher retention rate than maybe their more generic marketing competitors.
I mean, I think you have to give Cursor a lot of credit on this. They started out as a PLG, pure PLG, lots of students, lots of kind of individual developers. Just this week, Jensen from NVIDIA said that the Cursor was his favorite enterprise application. You
Wow.
know, the delta between where they started and that statement is like less than a year. And so obviously I give Cursor all the credit for that, but I will say I think they did a really good job in kind of thinking about, how do we take our initial PLG momentum and go up market and do the targeting right. And I think we've done a good job of that at Clay, but Cursor is a real amazing success story on staying really hungry, even when it looks like you're already
Yeah,
low.
that's great. Well, and also their revenue per employee is probably the greatest we've ever seen. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's a generational company. You probably can't take too many lessons from it, but I think the any business that I see that transformed from one motion to another in a short
yeah.
period of time, I think is like worth recognizing and it's worth recognizing because that kind of change is actually possible for every business. They just don't have all of the tooling, people, and processes in place to kind of make it happen.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting segue as well. One area that I'm really excited about from a go-to-market engineering perspective is the fact that, previously I was doing growth engineering, had spent a lot of time mostly optimizing any self-serve funnels. I think what's interesting in sort of this next iteration of go-to-market engineering is you're thinking much deeper and more robust beyond just PLG. I think PLG can get you to a certain level of product market fit, but I do think at this point in time, we're just starting to see some very massive, fast-growing companies that are growing from an inbound perspective and they're doing great from a growth rate. But I do worry about retention in not even the long term, maybe more the medium term, as they need to figure out like what is their long-term player for their customers and how can they strategically grow existing accounts to make them much meatier and
Yeah.
much more enduring.
Well, just to plug one of your companies, I think like WorkOS has an incredible opportunity now, maybe even more so than they did a few years ago. Like, we're happy customers of them, and the road to enterprise is probably actually easier now than it ever has
Yeah,
been. And it's actually maybe easy on the product side, but it's still really hard on the go-to-market side. And so I actually do think any PLG company that I talk to, I tend to ask them a little bit about what their plan is there. Are you planning to just sell into your inbound, or on top of it, are you planning to maybe go cold a little bit and take the fact that you might have a pretty good brand going? People from a Fortune 500 aren't just signing up and putting a credit card in, and that doesn't mean they haven't heard about it. So,
yeah,
uh, so yeah, I totally agree with you. I think you could almost think about it like companies being able to diversify their pipeline sources earlier than they maybe used to. And I
yeah,
honestly I think it plays into this whole GTM alpha idea um, where the tactics and the adoption of new tactics and the change there is accelerating. So it's not only that tactics expire, there's like a derivative to it where they expire faster today than they used to.
yeah,
And so because of that, if you hit upon something that's working, you might start the clock and say 8 months from now, I'm going to have some like next best alternative in the market. I better be in some other market or have some other
yeah.
product that's ready to go.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. Well, thanks so much for catching up on a Friday. I don't want to take up too
Yeah.
much of your time. I know it's been very busy for you and things are going